The morning air in the Ardennes forest carried the acrid smell of burning steel and diesel fuel as Sergeant Victor Lazarevich crouched behind his disabled Sherman tank on December 18, 1944. Ice crystals formed on his breath as he watched German Panzer rounds systematically destroy every American tank in his column except one. His own M4 Sherman, designated Ironclad, Viat, had taken 3 direct hits from a Panzer Mark IV, yet somehow its hull remained intact while smoke poured from disabled mechanical systems. The other 5 tanks in his platoon lay scattered across the frozen battlefield like broken toys, their crews either dead or scrambling for cover in the snow-covered undergrowth. Victor pressed his gloved hand against the tank's side armor, feeling the distinctive texture that had puzzled him since receiving this particular Sherman 3 months earlier. The metal felt different, almost crystalline under his fingers, unlike the standard rolled homogeneous armor he had grown accustomed to during 2 years of combat. He had no idea that the unusual steel protecting his life had been born in a cramped laboratory in Cleveland, Ohio, where a stubborn metallurgist had defied every military specification and risked his career to create an alloy that Army procurement officers had rejected as impractical and unnecessarily complex. No one in the 4th Armored Division knew that one man's defiance of military bureaucracy would prove the difference between survival and annihilation in the frozen hell of the Battle of the Bulge. The man responsible for Victor's survival had been born Kazimierz Żelazny in a cramped tenement building on Cleveland's East Side on March 7, 1908. His Polish immigrant parents, Stanisław and Katarzyna, had arrived in America with nothing but coal dust under their fingernails and an unshakable belief that their son would achieve something greater than the steel mills that dominated their neighborhood's horizon. Kazimier's father worked 16-hour shifts at Republic Steel, returning home each evening with his clothes blackened and his lungs burning from the furnace heat. Yet he never complained about the dangerous work that paid for his son's education. The boy showed an early fascination with metal that bordered on obsession, collecting discarded steel samples from the mill yards and conducting primitive experiments in the basement of their boarding house. By age 12, Kazimierz could identify different steel grades by touch alone, running his fingers across metal surfaces and describing their carbon content with startling accuracy. His high school chemistry teacher, Professor Heinrich Vollmer, recognized the boy's unique talent and encouraged him to pursue metallurgical engineering at Case Institute of Technology. Kazimierz worked nights loading freight cars to pay his tuition, his hands growing calloused and strong while his mind absorbed every detail about crystal structures, alloy compositions, and heat treatment processes. His classmates called him the Metal Monk because he spent more time in the laboratory than anywhere else, often sleeping on a cot beside the furnaces rather than walking home to his family's small apartment. During his senior year, he developed a revolutionary heat treatment process that could increase steel hardness by 30% while maintaining ductility, but his professors dismissed the work as too expensive for practical application. He graduated summa cum laude in 1931, just as the Great Depression devastated the American steel industry and left thousands of metallurgists competing for a handful of jobs. He had no idea that the economic catastrophe forcing him to accept a low-level position at Cuyahoga Steelworks would provide exactly the freedom he needed to pursue his most ambitious experiments. Kazimier's first decade at Cuyahoga Steelworks coincided with America's gradual emergence from economic depression and the growing threat of war in Europe. The company assigned him to quality control, a position that allowed him to examine steel samples from across the industrial Midwest while developing an encyclopedic knowledge of metallurgical processes used by different manufacturers. His supervisor, Chief Engineer Randolph Hartwell, quickly recognized Kazimier's exceptional abilities and granted him access to the company's experimental laboratory during evening hours. Casimir used this freedom to pursue his fascination with chromium-nickel steel alloys, convinced that traditional carbon steel lacked the molecular flexibility needed for extreme battlefield conditions. He studied metallurgical reports from the Spanish Civil War, paying particular attention to tank damage assessments that revealed how conventional armor failed under specific types of artillery bombardment. His notebooks filled with calculations exploring the relationship between grain boundary structures and impact resistance, leading him to hypothesize that properly aligned crystal formations could distribute kinetic energy more efficiently than standard homogeneous steel. His colleagues considered his theories too complex for practical manufacturing, but Casimir persisted with his experiments, often working until dawn while testing different combinations of trace elements and heat treatment cycles. He developed a reputation as an eccentric perfectionist who spoke more comfortably about molecular structures than everyday conversation, earning him the nickname the Professor among the mill workers who respected his dedication, if not his social skills. His breakthrough came during the summer of 1939, when he successfully created a steel alloy that demonstrated 40% greater impact resistance than military-grade armor plate, while maintaining the same weight and thickness specifications. He documented every aspect of the process in meticulous detail, creating a manufacturing protocol that could theoretically be scaled for industrial production. Though he knew that convincing military procurement officers to adopt unproven technology would require political skills he had never cultivated. He had no idea that the outbreak of war in Europe would soon create exactly the crisis needed to test his theories under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, transformed American industry overnight, as factories that had struggled through the Depression suddenly faced unlimited demand for military equipment. The War Production Board established ambitious targets for tank manufacturing, calling for the production of 50,000 armored vehicles by the end of 1943 to supply American forces and Allied nations fighting Axis powers across multiple theaters of operation. Cuyahoga Steelworks received its first military contract in February 1942, tasked with producing armor plate for M4 Sherman tanks that would form the backbone of American armored divisions throughout the war. Casimir found himself promoted to senior metallurgist and assigned to oversee quality standards for all steel products destined for military use. The promotion brought new responsibilities, but also new frustrations, as Army specifications required strict adherence to proven metallurgical formulas that left no room for experimental improvements. Military procurement officers emphasized speed and consistency over innovation, demanding that manufacturers follow established protocols without deviation to ensure compatibility across different production facilities. Casimir chafed under these restrictions, convinced that his experimental alloy could save countless lives if properly implemented, but his requests for permission to substitute improved steel formulations were consistently rejected by Army materials engineers who considered any deviation from standard specifications a potential threat to supply chain reliability. His direct supervisor, Colonel Wesley Thornton, explained the military perspective during a tense meeting in March 1942, noting that battlefield conditions demanded absolute confidence in equipment performance rather than theoretical improvements that might introduce unforeseen complications. Casimir understood the logic but remained convinced that conservative thinking would cost American lives when enemy technology evolved beyond current defensive capabilities. He continued his experiments in secret, using surplus materials and after-hours laboratory access to refine his alloy composition while documenting performance improvements that he hoped would eventually persuade military officials to reconsider their position. The frustration of watching inferior steel leave the factory while superior alternatives remained unused gnawed at his conscience, particularly as casualty reports from North Africa revealed the deadly consequences of inadequate armor protection. He had no idea that his persistence would soon be tested by a crisis that would force him to choose between military regulations and the lives of American tank crews facing a new generation of German anti-tank weapons. The first reports of American tank losses in Tunisia during the spring of 1943 revealed a disturbing pattern that military analysts initially attributed to tactical inexperience rather than equipment deficiencies. M4 Sherman tanks were suffering catastrophic armor failures when hit by German 75mm anti-tank guns, with penetrating rounds causing secondary explosions that killed entire crews instantly. Field reports described American armor cracking like eggshells under German fire, while captured enemy documents revealed that Wehrmacht tank commanders had developed specific tactics for exploiting Sherman armor weaknesses. The War Department's initial response focused on improving tactical training and battlefield positioning rather than addressing potential metallurgical problems, but Casimir recognized the symptoms of brittle steel failure in every damage report he examined. His analysis of recovered armor samples revealed that standard military steel suffered from grain boundary weakness under high-velocity impact, exactly the problem his experimental alloy had been designed to solve. He prepared a detailed report demonstrating how his chromium-nickel steel could prevent the catastrophic failures killing American crews. But Army procurement officers rejected his proposal without serious consideration, citing concerns about manufacturing complexity and supply chain disruption. The rejection letter, dated May 14, 1943, dismissed his work as an unnecessary complication to proven production methods and warned against freelance engineering that could compromise battlefield reliability. Casimir spent sleepless nights knowing that men were dying while superior protective technology sat unused in his laboratory, yet he remained bound by military contracts that prohibited unauthorized modifications to Army specifications. His breaking point came during the first week of June, when he received a personal letter from his cousin Stefan, a tank commander in the 2nd Armored Division, describing the death of his best friend during a German ambush near Gafsa. Stefan's letter included detailed descriptions of how American shells had bounced harmlessly off German armor, while enemy rounds penetrated Sherman tanks like they were made of tin foil, killing experienced crews who had survived months of combat, only to die because their equipment failed them. That night, Casimir made a decision that would define the rest of his career and save hundreds of lives, though it would also put him in direct violation of military regulations and potentially end his access to defense contracts. He decided to implement his improved alloy formula in secret, substituting his experimental steel for standard armor plate in small batches that would be virtually undetectable among thousands of tanks rolling off American production lines. The technical challenges of implementing unauthorized metallurgical changes within a heavily monitored production environment required careful planning and considerable personal risk. Casimir identified a window of opportunity during the night shift between 2 and 4 in the morning, when skeleton crews focused on maintaining production quotas rather than monitoring chemical compositions of individual steel batches. He developed a system for substituting his experimental alloy components during the melting process, adding precise amounts of chromium and nickel to standard steel formulations while adjusting heat treatment cycles to achieve optimal grain structure alignment. The modifications required perfect timing and absolute precision, as any deviation from normal appearance or weight would trigger quality control investigations that would expose his unauthorized activities. He recruited 2 trusted associates, senior technician Bogdan Kowalczyk and night shift supervisor Martha Kellerman, both of whom had grown frustrated with military bureaucracy that prevented implementation of obvious improvements to tank armor. Martha provided access to production schedules and shift rotations, while Bogdan helped modify furnace controls to accommodate the complex heat treatment requirements of the experimental alloy. The three conspirators worked in absolute secrecy, processing approximately 50 armor plates per month with the improved steel formula while maintaining normal production quotas for standard military specifications. Casimir created detailed records of every modified batch, including serial numbers and destination assignments, hoping to track performance data that would eventually justify their unauthorized actions. The steel they produced looked identical to standard armor plate, meeting all visual and dimensional requirements while providing significantly greater impact resistance through improved molecular structure. Their first modified armor plates left the factory in July 1943, bound for Sherman tanks that would be assigned to Armored Division's training for the invasion of Italy. The tanks incorporating Casimir's unauthorized steel improvements would soon face the ultimate test of combat effectiveness, though months would pass before anyone recognized the connection between improved crew survival rates and the unusual metallurgical properties of specific armor plates. Casimir continued his secret modifications throughout the summer and fall of 1943, producing nearly 400 improved armor plates while maintaining perfect operational security. He had no idea that one of his modified tanks would soon prove the value of his work during the most desperate tank battle of the European War. Viktor Lazarevich had received his modified Sherman tank, designated Ironclad, during equipment replacement operations in November 1944, just weeks before the 4th Armored Division would face its greatest challenge in the Ardennes forest. The tank's unusual serial number, CC4471X, meant nothing to Viktor or his crew, but it identified the vehicle as one of Casimir's unauthorized experimental units produced during August 1943. Viktor's crew consisted of 4 experienced tankers who had survived combat operations from Normandy through the liberation of Paris, developing the tight-knit camaraderie that sustained armored units through months of brutal fighting. Gunner Sergeant Dmitry Volkov had escaped the siege of Stalingrad as a teenager before immigrating to America and enlisting in the Army, bringing intimate knowledge of German tank tactics and an almost supernatural ability to identify enemy positions through sound and vibration. Driver Private Ezra Finkelstein came from a family of Brooklyn mechanics and could coax performance from damaged engines that amazed veteran technicians, while Loader Corporal Wesley Brightfeather combined Cherokee tracking instincts with mechanical expertise that made him invaluable during night operations. The crew had lost their previous tank, Thunder Road, to a German Panzerfaust during street fighting in Metz, escaping with minor injuries, but losing all their personal possessions and the comfortable familiarity that came from months of living in the same confined space. Ironclad felt different from their previous Sherman, though none of the crew could precisely identify the source of their unease. The armor seemed to ring differently when struck by debris, producing a crystalline sound rather than the dull thud they associated with standard steel plate. Viktor mentioned the unusual acoustic properties to his maintenance sergeant, who examined the tank thoroughly, but found nothing outside normal specifications. The crew gradually adapted to their new vehicle, conducting training exercises and minor combat operations that revealed excellent mechanical reliability and superior performance during high-stress maneuvering. They had no reason to suspect that their tank incorporated experimental armor technology that would soon mean the difference between life and death during the most challenging battle of their military careers. The German offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge was already being planned in secret Wehrmacht headquarters, targeting exactly the sector where Viktor's tank would face its ultimate test. Adolf Hitler's decision to launch Operation Watch on the Rhine represented Germany's final attempt to split Allied forces and potentially negotiate a separate peace with Western powers before Soviet armies could advance deep into German territory. The offensive, planned for mid-December 1944, would concentrate 25 German divisions against a lightly defended sector of the Ardennes Forest, where American commanders had positioned inexperienced units and battle-weary divisions in what they considered a quiet sector suitable for rest and training. German planners selected the Ardennes specifically because its dense forests and narrow roads would neutralize Allied advantages in air power and armor mobility, while winter weather conditions would ground Allied aircraft and favor German forces equipped for cold weather fighting. The plan called for 3 separate Army groups to punch through American defensive lines and advance rapidly toward the port of Antwerp, cutting off supplies to British and Canadian forces in the Netherlands, while creating the political crisis needed to force Western allies to negotiate. Wehrmacht commanders assembled their most experienced panzer divisions for the operation, including units equipped with new Tiger II tanks mounting 80 omnibus guns, capable of destroying any Allied armor at extreme range. German intelligence had identified specific weaknesses in American tank design through extensive analysis of captured vehicles, developing tactics specifically designed to exploit Sherman armor vulnerabilities that had proven effective throughout the campaign in Western Europe. The offensive would begin before dawn on December 16, 1944, with concentrated artillery bombardment followed by coordinated armored thrusts along multiple axes of advance. Victor's 4th Armored Division held a defensive sector near Bastogne that German planners had identified as a critical road junction that must be captured quickly to maintain operational momentum. The division's tanks were dispersed across a 20-mile front, with individual platoons assigned to support infantry positions that would bear the initial brunt of German attacks. Victor's platoon held a forward position along a ridge line overlooking a valley that provided one of the few vehicle approaches through the dense forest, making his 6-tank unit a priority target for German forces advancing toward Bastogne. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test every aspect of American equipment and training against Germany's final reserves of experienced troops and modern weapons. Neither Victor nor his crew realized that their survival would depend entirely on metallurgical innovations that had been rejected by the same army that now depended on their effectiveness. The German offensive began at 5:30 in the morning on December 16, 1944, with a massive artillery bombardment that shattered the pre-dawn silence and sent American forces scrambling for defensive positions throughout the Ardennes forest. Victor's tank platoon occupied concealed positions along a tree-covered ridge overlooking the village of Neuville, where intelligence reports suggested German armor might attempt to advance toward the critical road junction at Bastogne. The artillery barrage lasted 90 minutes, filling the air with whistling shells and explosive debris that stripped branches from trees and sent forest animals fleeing in panic across the snow-covered landscape. Victor crouched inside Ironclad's cramped turret, listening to radio reports of German breakthrough attacks along a 50-mile front while trying to maintain contact with other American units that were rapidly being overrun or forced to retreat. The artillery bombardment finally lifted at 7 o'clock, replaced by an ominous silence that suggested German ground forces were beginning their advance through the forest. Victor's crew waited in tense silence, watching the tree line through periscopes and listening for the distinctive sound of German tank engines that would signal the beginning of their own battle. The first enemy contact came at 7:45, when German infantry emerged from the forest in extended skirmish lines, advancing cautiously up the ridge while searching for American defensive positions. Victor held fire, following standing orders to remain concealed until enemy armor appeared, but his crew tracked German soldiers through their sights while reporting enemy movements to regimental headquarters. The radio brought increasingly desperate reports from other sectors, where German panzer units were smashing through American defensive lines and advancing rapidly toward strategic objectives. Victor realized that his small platoon might be the only American armor remaining between German forces and the vital road network around Bastogne. Yet he also knew that 6 Sherman tanks had virtually no chance against the concentrated German armor reportedly advancing in his direction. The mathematical impossibility of the situation became clear when radio intercepts revealed that 2 German panzer battalions, approximately 60 tanks, were advancing directly toward his position with orders to secure the ridge line before noon. He had no idea that the experimental armor protecting his crew would soon face the ultimate test of metallurgical innovation against military necessity. The first German tanks appeared at the edge of the forest at 8:15, moving cautiously through the trees in a formation that revealed experienced tactical leadership and confidence in their equipment's superiority. Victor identified the lead vehicles as Panzer Mark IVs, mounting long-barreled 75mm guns, followed by at least 12 additional tanks that included several Tigeras with their distinctive angular turrets and massive 80mm cannons. The German column advanced with textbook precision, using terrain features and forest cover to minimize exposure while maintaining formation integrity that would allow rapid deployment into battle line when they reached open ground. Victor reported the contact to regimental headquarters, but received only static in response, suggesting that German artillery had destroyed communication facilities or that his platoon had been cut off from higher command. His platoon leader, Lieutenant Robert Hensley, made the difficult decision to engage German forces despite overwhelming odds, reasoning that any delay in the German advance might allow American forces in Bastogne to prepare defensive positions or receive reinforcements. The 6 Sherman tanks opened fire simultaneously at maximum range, sending 75mm shells screaming toward German armor while immediately shifting positions to avoid return fire. Victor's first shot struck the lead Panzer Mark IV squarely on the frontal armor, but the round bounced harmlessly off the sloped steel plate while the German tank continued its advance without apparent damage. The German response was swift and devastatingly accurate, with multiple tanks firing simultaneously at muzzle flashes that revealed American positions along the ridgeline. Victor watched in horror as the tank to his left, Thunder Bay, took a direct hit that penetrated the turret and caused a secondary explosion that killed the entire crew instantly. 2 more American tanks were destroyed within seconds, their hulls erupting in flames as German rounds found critical vulnerabilities in standard Sherman armor. Victor realized that his platoon was being systematically destroyed by superior German firepower, yet he continued firing while maneuvering desperately to avoid the concentrated enemy fire that was rapidly eliminating American resistance. The battle had become a mathematical equation of survival, with each passing second reducing the odds of escape while increasing the certainty of defeat. He had no idea that the unusual properties of his tank's armor were about to demonstrate the difference between theoretical metallurgy and battlefield reality. The German breakthrough at Victor's position represented just one small piece of a massive offensive that was overwhelming American forces throughout the Ardennes forest and threatening to achieve the strategic surprise that German planners had desperately needed. Across a 50-mile front, 25 German divisions were smashing through American defensive lines held by 4 inexperienced or battle-weary divisions that had been positioned in what commanders considered a quiet sector, suitable for rest and training. The German 6th Panzer Army, commanded by SS Oberstgruppenführer Joseph Sepp Dietrich, was advancing rapidly toward the Meuse River with orders to cross at Dinant and advance toward Antwerp, while the 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel targeted American positions around Bastogne with the goal of securing critical road junctions before Allied forces could organize effective resistance. American commanders had been caught completely off guard by the scale and intensity of the German offensive, which had concentrated more armor and artillery in the Ardennes than Allied intelligence had believed possible, given Germany's desperate strategic situation. The element of surprise had been achieved through elaborate deception measures that convinced Allied commanders that German forces were incapable of mounting major offensive operations, while strict operational security prevented American intelligence from detecting the massive troop movements that had positioned German forces for their attack. Radio intercepts revealed that German units were advancing ahead of schedule on most sectors, with some Panzer spearheads already approaching objectives that planners had not expected to reach until the second day of operations. American forces were fighting desperate delaying actions across the entire front, but individual units were being overwhelmed by concentrated German attacks that exploited weaknesses in Allied defensive planning and equipment capabilities. The situation at Victor's position reflected the broader crisis facing American forces throughout the Ardennes, where isolated units were facing impossible odds while hoping that their sacrifice might buy time for organized resistance to develop. The mathematical reality of the Battle of the Bulge had become a race between German offensive momentum and American defensive adaptability, with the outcome dependent on countless individual actions by soldiers who understood that their decisions might determine the fate of the entire European war. Victor's tank crew represented just 4 men among hundreds of thousands engaged in the battle. Yet their survival would depend entirely on metallurgical innovations that had been developed in a Cleveland laboratory by a man who had never seen combat but understood exactly how metal behaved under extreme stress. The German tanks advancing toward Victor's position represented the pinnacle of Wehrmacht armored technology, equipped with guns and armor that outclassed American equipment in virtually every measurable category. The Panzer Mark IV tanks mounting long-barreled 75mm guns could penetrate Sherman armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, while their own frontal armor remained virtually immune to American 75mm rounds at any practical engagement distance. The Tiger I tanks following close behind, mounted 88mm guns originally designed for anti-aircraft use, adapted for tank warfare with devastating effectiveness that had earned the respect and fear of Allied tank crews throughout the European campaign. German crews had accumulated years of combat experience fighting across multiple theaters, developing tactical expertise that compensated for their numerical disadvantage through superior positioning and fire discipline. Their ammunition included armor-piercing rounds with tungsten cores that could penetrate any existing Allied armor, while their own protective systems had been designed specifically to defeat American and British anti-tank weapons. The German advance up the ridge toward Victor's position followed proven tactical doctrine that maximized their technological advantages while minimizing exposure to American defensive fire. Individual tank commanders used terrain features and mutual support to advance methodically while maintaining formation integrity that would allow rapid concentration of firepower against specific targets. The mathematical advantage held by German forces was overwhelming, with superior firepower, better protection, and tactical positioning that should have guaranteed rapid victory against the isolated American platoon. Victor understood these realities as he watched German tanks advance with mechanical precision, knowing that his crew's survival depended on factors beyond firepower and armor thickness. The unusual sound his tank's armor made when struck by debris had puzzled him for weeks, but he was about to discover that Casimir's experimental steel possessed properties that would neutralize German technological superiority through metallurgical innovation rather than tactical maneuvering. The next few minutes would determine whether theoretical improvements to steel composition could overcome the mathematical certainties of armored combat, with 4 American lives hanging in the balance of a metallurgical experiment that had been rejected by the same army that now depended on its effectiveness. The critical moment arrived at 8:27 in the morning, when a German Tiger tank achieved a perfect firing solution on ironclad at a range of 800 meters and fired an 88-millimeter armor-piercing round that should have penetrated the Sherman's frontal armor and killed Victor's entire crew instantly. The tungsten cord projectile struck the tank's front plate at optimal angle and velocity, delivering kinetic energy equivalent to several tons of TNT concentrated in an area smaller than a silver dollar. Victor felt the massive impact as a physical blow that threw him against his seat, while the entire tank shuddered under forces that would have destroyed any standard Sherman tank. The sound of the impact differed dramatically from anything he had experienced during 2 years of combat, producing a distinctive crystalline ring, rather than the sharp crack of penetrating armor that usually preceded catastrophic secondary explosions. Smoke and debris filled the air around Ironclad, but Victor realized with amazement that the German round had failed to penetrate his tank's armor despite hitting at point-blank range under ideal conditions. His crew stared at each other in disbelief, knowing that they should have been dead, yet finding themselves intact and capable of continuing the fight. Gunner Dmitry Volkov examined the point of impact through his periscope, reporting that the German round had created only a shallow crater in the frontal armor, rather than the complete penetration that should have resulted from such a powerful hit. Driver Ezra Finkelstein checked engine systems and found all mechanical functions operating normally, while loader Wesley Brightfeather confirmed that ammunition storage remained secure despite the massive shock of impact. Victor realized that his tank possessed some unknown protective advantage that had saved their lives, though he had no explanation for armor performance that exceeded every specification he had ever seen. The German Tiger commander had apparently reached the same conclusion as the enemy tank fired 3 additional rounds in rapid succession, each impact producing the same crystalline sound and shallow crater damage without achieving penetration. Other German tanks joined the concentrated fire, sending multiple rounds against Ironclad's armor, while Victor's crew continued fighting from a tank that should have been destroyed within seconds of first contact. The mathematical impossibility of their survival became clear as round after round failed to penetrate armor that looked identical to standard Sherman steel but performed like something entirely different. Victor had no idea that he was witnessing the battlefield validation of metallurgical theories that had been developed in a Cleveland laboratory and implemented through unauthorized modifications to military specifications. Casimir Zelazny would not learn about Victor's survival until months after the Battle of the Bulge had ended, but the engagement at Noville represented the first combat test of his experimental alloy under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The chromium-nickel steel he had developed differed from standard military armor in ways that became apparent only under high-velocity impact, when crystal grain structures aligned through his specialized heat treatment process, distributed kinetic energy across the entire armor plate rather than allowing it to concentrate at the point of impact. Traditional homogeneous armor failed when projectile energy exceeded the material's ability to absorb shock at a specific location, creating the penetration holes that killed tank crews throughout the war. Casimir's alloy achieved the same hardness as military steel, while maintaining superior ductility through molecular structures that flexed under impact rather than fracturing, spreading destructive forces over larger areas until kinetic energy dissipated harmlessly. The manufacturing process required precise control of chemical composition and heat treatment that Army procurement officers had rejected as unnecessarily complex, but the resulting steel could withstand impacts that would destroy conventional armor while maintaining the same weight and thickness specifications. Victor's tank had received armor plates processed during Casimir's most successful experimental run in August 1943, when perfect atmospheric conditions and optimal raw materials had produced steel with properties that exceeded even Casimir's theoretical projections. The German rounds striking ironclad encountered armor that behaved unlike anything Wehrmacht tank crews had previously experienced, absorbing kinetic energy that should have been sufficient to penetrate twice the actual armor thickness. Each impact created surface damage that looked severe but remained superficial, while the underlying steel structure maintained complete integrity despite repeated high-velocity strikes. The mathematical impossibility of ironclad's survival under concentrated German fire would have been immediately apparent to any metallurgist familiar with standard armor performance, yet Victor's crew could only continue fighting while marveling at their inexplicable good fortune. The experimental steel was performing exactly as Casimir had predicted during his secret laboratory tests, validating theories that had been dismissed by military engineers as impractical speculation. The irony of the situation would have pleased Casimir, as unauthorized modifications to Army specifications were saving American lives while proving the superiority of innovative thinking over bureaucratic conservatism. The battle at Nouville continued for another 47 minutes, as Victor's incredibly resilient tank single-handedly delayed the German advance while other American units in the area reorganized their defensive positions. Ironclad absorbed a total of 17 direct hits from German armor-piercing rounds, each impact producing the distinctive crystalline sound that had become familiar to Victor's crew while failing to achieve the penetration that should have been mathematically certain. The tank's experimental armor performed flawlessly under conditions that would have destroyed multiple standard Sherman tanks, allowing Victor's crew to continue fighting against overwhelming odds while inflicting significant casualties on advancing German forces. Dmitry Volkov's exceptional gunnery skills, combined with the tank's inexplicable survivability, resulted in the destruction of 4 German tanks and the disabling of 3 others before ammunition supplies finally forced Ironclad to withdraw from the engagement. The German advance had been delayed by nearly 2 hours, providing critical time for American forces around Bastogne to establish defensive positions that would prove decisive in the larger battle. Victor's crew escaped through a forest trail that avoided German infantry positions, carrying with them the secretive armor that had performed far beyond any reasonable expectations. The mathematical impossibility of their survival became a source of wonder and speculation among other tank crews, who examined Ironclad's damaged but intact armor while searching for explanations that remained beyond their understanding. Victor submitted a detailed after-action report describing the unusual performance of his tank's armor, noting the distinctive acoustic properties and superior impact resistance that had saved his crew's lives, but military investigators found nothing in the tank's documentation that explained its exceptional protective capabilities. The armor plates looked identical to standard military steel, bearing proper serial numbers and manufacturing stamps that indicated normal production processes, while metallurgical tests revealed chemical compositions within acceptable tolerances for regulation armor. Victor's report disappeared into military bureaucracy, filed alongside thousands of other combat accounts from the Battle of the Bulge, while Ironclad received standard maintenance and returned to combat operations without any recognition of its unique protective properties. The tank would survive the remainder of the European War, participating in the liberation of concentration camps and the final advance into Germany while protecting Victor's crew through dozens of additional combat engagements. He had no idea that his survival had validated the work of a Cleveland metallurgist whose unauthorized modifications to Army specifications had proven more effective than years of official research and development. The broader impact of Casimir's secret steel improvements extended far beyond Victor's individual survival, though the connection between improved crew survival rates and unauthorized metallurgical modifications would remain hidden for decades after the war's end. Statistical analysis conducted by Army researchers in 1946 revealed puzzling variations in Sherman tank losses during the final months of the European campaign, with certain production batches demonstrating significantly lower casualty rates despite facing identical combat conditions. Tanks manufactured during specific time periods at particular facilities showed crew survival rates 30 to 40% higher than statistical averages, leading investigators to search for explanations in manufacturing processes, crew training, or tactical employment. The patterns were subtle enough to avoid immediate detection during wartime operations, when overall casualty rates masked the superior performance of individual vehicles, but post-war analysis revealed clear correlations between production dates and battlefield effectiveness. Investigators examined maintenance records, ammunition loads, and crew experience levels without finding factors that could account for the statistical anomalies, while metallurgical testing of recovered armor samples showed compositions within normal tolerances for military specifications. The mystery deepened when researchers discovered that improved survival rates correlated precisely with production runs from Cuyahoga Steel Works during the period when Casimir had been implementing his unauthorized modifications, though the connection remained invisible without knowledge of his secret activities. Several hundred American tank crews had survived combat encounters that should have been fatal, their lives saved by metallurgical improvements that existed outside official documentation and military awareness. The statistical evidence suggested that innovative thinking and willingness to challenge established procedures had prevented thousands of casualties, yet the responsible individual remained anonymous within the vast industrial complex that had produced American military equipment. Casimir continued working at Cuyahoga Steel Works throughout the war, maintaining his secret while watching casualty reports that confirmed the effectiveness of his unauthorized improvements. He understood that revealing his activities would result in criminal prosecution for violating military contracts. Yet, he also knew that his conscience was clear because his actions had saved American lives. The moral complexity of his situation reflected broader tensions between individual initiative and institutional authority that defined much of the American war effort, where innovation and bureaucracy coexisted uneasily while pursuing the common goal of victory. Casimir's post-war career reflected the complicated legacy of innovation that had violated regulations while achieving superior results. Military investigators never discovered his unauthorized modifications, allowing him to continue working in metallurgy while carrying the secret of his wartime contributions. He received promotion to chief metallurgist at Cuyahoga Steel Works in 1947, a position that provided him with the authority to implement improvements openly rather than through secret modifications. His experimental alloy formula became the foundation for post-war developments in armor steel that would eventually be adopted by military specifications, though the connection to his wartime work remained hidden. He married his laboratory assistant, Dr. Elena Vasquez, in 1948, creating a partnership that combined their complementary expertise in metallurgy and chemistry. Their collaboration resulted in numerous patents for steel processing techniques that found applications in civilian industries ranging from automotive manufacturing to construction materials. Casimir never discussed his wartime activities, even with Elena, maintaining operational security that had become habitual during his secret modifications to Army contracts. He received several industry awards for contributions to metallurgical science, though the recognition focused on his post-war innovations rather than the combat-proven steel that had saved hundreds of American lives. His laboratory notebooks from the war years remained locked in a safety deposit box, containing detailed documentation of unauthorized activities that could still result in prosecution decades after the events. The mathematical precision of his experimental data and the careful records of production runs that had incorporated improved steel represented a complete technical history of successful innovation conducted outside official channels. Casimir understood that his work had demonstrated the superiority of individual initiative over institutional conservatism. Yet he also recognized that revealing his activities would accomplish nothing positive while potentially damaging relationships with military customers who continued to purchase steel from Cuyahoga Steel Works. The irony of his situation amused him privately, as he continued developing improvements to military specifications while knowing that his greatest contribution to American defense had been accomplished through deliberate violation of those same specifications. He had no idea that his secret would eventually be discovered through careful analysis of battlefield performance data that would vindicate his wartime decisions and establish his reputation as one of America's most innovative metallurgists. The truth about Casimir's unauthorized steel improvements emerged during a 1967 graduate research project at Case Institute of Technology, when metallurgy student Jennifer Nakamura discovered statistical anomalies in World War II tank loss data while researching her doctoral dissertation on battlefield metallurgy. Jennifer's analysis revealed patterns that previous investigators had missed, correlating production dates and manufacturing facilities with crew survival rates that suggested significant variations in armor performance. Her advisor, Professor David Chen, encouraged her to pursue the anomalies through detailed metallurgical testing of preserved armor samples from the U.S. Army Center of Military History. Chemical analysis revealed trace elements in certain armor plates that exceeded normal tolerances for military steel, while microscopic examination showed grain structures consistent with advanced heat treatment processes that had not been officially adopted until the 1950s. Jennifer's research gradually focused on Cuyahoga Steel Works during the period from July 1943 through March 1944, when statistical evidence suggested that tanks produced at that facility demonstrated superior battlefield performance. She contacted the company's personnel department and discovered that Casimir Zelazny had been senior metallurgist during the relevant time period and was still employed as chief metallurgist 24 years after the war's end. Her interview request led to a carefully worded response from Casimir, who expressed interest in her research while avoiding specific comments about wartime production processes. Their first meeting, conducted in November 1967, began with general discussion of metallurgical theory before gradually approaching the specific questions that had motivated Jennifer's investigation. Casimir listened carefully to her presentation of statistical evidence and chemical analysis before admitting that her conclusions were essentially correct, though he requested that her findings remained confidential until he could consider the implications for his continuing career. Jennifer agreed to delay publication while Casimir decided whether to reveal the complete story of his unauthorized modifications to Army specifications. The decision required him to balance personal privacy against historical accuracy while considering the potential value of his experience for future metallurgical development. His secret had been preserved for 24 years, but scientific analysis had finally revealed evidence that could no longer be ignored or explained through conventional factors. He realized that the time had come to document his wartime activities completely, creating a historical record that would preserve technical details for future researchers while acknowledging the moral complexities of innovation conducted outside official channels. Casimir's decision to cooperate with Jennifer's research led to the publication of a comprehensive technical paper that detailed his unauthorized steel improvements and their impact on American tank crew survival during World War II. The paper, published in the Journal of Metallurgical Engineering in March 1968, included complete chemical formulations and processing procedures for the experimental alloy, along with statistical documentation of battlefield performance improvements. Casimir's detailed laboratory notebooks provided technical specifications that allowed other researchers to reproduce his results, while battlefield data confirmed that his modifications had saved approximately 700 American lives during the final 18 months of the European War. The publication created considerable controversy within military and metallurgical circles, where opinions divided between those who praised Casimir's innovative thinking and those who criticized his violation of military regulations. Army investigators conducted a formal review of his wartime activities, but concluded that prosecution would serve no useful purpose given the positive results of his actions and the passage of time since the events. Military procurement officials acknowledged that his improvements had proven superior to official specifications, while noting that unauthorized modifications to defense contracts remained unacceptable regardless of their effectiveness. Casimir received both commendation and criticism for his wartime decisions, with supporters arguing that individual initiative had compensated for institutional failures, while critics maintained that military regulations existed for valid reasons that transcended individual judgment. The technical aspects of his work received widespread praise from metallurgical researchers, who recognized his heat treatment innovations as significant contributions to the science of steel processing. His formula was incorporated into updated military specifications for armor steel, formally adopting improvements that had been proven effective through battlefield testing under the most extreme conditions. The moral complexity of his situation generated extensive discussion in military journals and engineering publications, where analysts debated the balance between individual innovation and institutional authority in defense procurement. Casimir's case became a standard example in military ethics courses, illustrating the difficulties of maintaining regulatory compliance while pursuing technological improvement in life-or-death situations. He had demonstrated that unauthorized innovation could achieve superior results, yet he had also violated trust relationships that formed the foundation of military procurement systems. The mathematical precision of his technical success was undeniable, but the broader implications for military organization and individual responsibility remained subjects of ongoing debate. Viktor Lazarevich learned about Casimir's role in his survival through a newspaper article published in June 1968, 3 months after the technical paper had revealed the secret of Ironclad's experimental armor. The article included Viktor's photograph and battlefield account alongside Casimir's explanation of the metallurgical innovations that had saved his crew's life during the Battle of the Bulge. Viktor contacted Casimir immediately, leading to a correspondence that would continue for the remainder of both men's lives and eventually result in a personal friendship that bridged the gap between theoretical innovation and practical application. Their first meeting, arranged in Cleveland during September 1968, brought together the metallurgist whose work had been conducted in laboratory isolation and the tank commander whose survival had validated experimental theories under combat conditions. Viktor expressed gratitude that transcended simple appreciation for technical achievement, recognizing that Casimir's willingness to risk his career had directly enabled Viktor's post-war life, including marriage to his wife Anna and the births of their 3 children. Casimir found profound satisfaction in meeting someone whose life had been saved by his work, transforming abstract statistical data about crew survival rates into personal relationships with specific individuals who had benefited from his innovations. Viktor provided detailed descriptions of Ironclad's performance during multiple combat engagements, offering battlefield perspectives that enriched Casimir's understanding of how his steel had behaved under actual fighting conditions. Their conversations revealed the human dimension of technological innovation, where laboratory theories had been validated through life-or-death experiences that no amount of testing could duplicate. Viktor's survival represented just one example among hundreds of American tank crews who had lived because of Casimir's unauthorized modifications, yet the personal connection between them made abstract statistics concrete and meaningful. Their friendship became a symbol of collaboration between innovation and application, demonstrating how individual initiative could bridge gaps between theoretical possibility and practical necessity. Casimir's decision to violate military regulations had been vindicated not only through technical success, but also through personal relationships with the men whose lives his work had saved. The mathematical precision of his metallurgical theories had been proven through battlefield testing, but the moral validation came from friendships with soldiers who understood the true meaning of his contributions. Victor's survival had depended on steel that should not have existed according to military specifications. Yet the unauthorized innovation had proven more effective than years of official research and development. The broader legacy of Casimir's work extended far beyond World War II applications, as his heat treatment innovations and alloy compositions influenced metallurgical development throughout the second half of the 20th century. Military specifications for armor steel incorporated his improvements beginning in 1969, formally adopting processing techniques that had been proven effective through secret battlefield testing 25 years earlier. Civilian applications of his techniques found uses in automotive safety systems, construction materials, and aerospace components that required superior impact resistance combined with weight efficiency. His patents contributed to technological advances in industries ranging from oil drilling equipment to nuclear reactor containment systems, where material failure could result in catastrophic consequences. The fundamental principles underlying his experimental alloy became standard elements of metallurgical education, teaching future engineers about crystal structure manipulation and grain boundary optimization. His willingness to challenge established procedures inspired generations of researchers to question conventional wisdom while pursuing innovative solutions to technical problems. The case study of his unauthorized steel improvements became standard curriculum in engineering ethics courses, where students debated the balance between individual initiative and institutional authority in technological development. Military historians recognized his contribution as an example of successful innovation achieved outside official channels, demonstrating that bureaucratic conservatism could sometimes obstruct technological progress that was urgently needed. His work illustrated the importance of individual expertise and judgment in situations where institutional procedures failed to address changing operational requirements. The statistical evidence of improved crew survival rates provided quantitative validation for the principle that innovation should be evaluated based on results rather than procedural compliance. Casimir's legacy represented the successful integration of scientific knowledge, technical skill, and moral courage in pursuit of solutions that saved human lives while advancing metallurgical science. His unauthorized modifications to Army specifications had violated military regulations while achieving superior results, creating a complex moral precedent that continued to influence discussions about innovation and authority in defense procurement. The mathematical precision of his work and the battlefield validation of his theories established his reputation as one of America's most innovative metallurgists, while his personal relationships with tank crews who had survived because of his steel provided emotional validation for decisions that had required considerable personal risk. His story demonstrated that individual initiative could compensate for institutional failures while advancing technological capabilities that served broader strategic purposes. Casimir Zelazny died peacefully in his sleep on November 3, 1984, 40 years after his unauthorized steel had saved Viktor Lazarevich's life in the Ardennes forest. His funeral in Cleveland attracted metallurgists, military historians, and World War II veterans who came to honor a man whose innovative thinking had bridged the gap between laboratory theory and battlefield necessity. Victor delivered the main eulogy, describing how Casimir's willingness to challenge established procedures had enabled hundreds of American families to welcome home tank crews who would otherwise have died in burning Shermans across the battlefields of Europe. The technical achievements that had defined Casimir's career were remembered alongside the moral courage that had driven him to risk prosecution while saving American lives through unauthorized improvements to military equipment. His laboratory notebooks were donated to Case Institute of Technology, where they became primary sources for researchers studying the relationship between individual innovation and institutional authority in technological development. The steel processing techniques he had developed continued to influence military and civilian applications, while his case study remained standard curriculum in engineering ethics courses that examined the balance between procedural compliance and results-oriented thinking. His legacy represented successful integration of scientific knowledge, technical expertise, and personal responsibility in pursuit of solutions that advance both metallurgical science and human welfare. The mathematical precision of his experimental data and the battlefield validation of his theories established a permanent foundation for understanding how individual initiative could achieve superior results when institutional procedures failed to address urgent operational requirements. Victor maintained Casimir's laboratory notebooks as historical documents that preserved technical details for future researchers while honoring the memory of a man whose unauthorized innovation had saved his life and the lives of hundreds of other American tank crews. The friendship between the metallurgist and the tank commander had demonstrated how theoretical achievements could be transformed into personal relationships that transcended simple appreciation for technical success. Casimir's story continued to inspire engineers and researchers who faced similar conflicts between institutional authority and individual judgment, providing an example of how moral courage could be combined with technical expertise to achieve results that served broader humanitarian purposes. The final irony of Casimir's legacy appeared in 1991, when the U.S. Army formally adopted metallurgical standards based on his original experimental formulations, officially recognizing techniques that had been rejected as impractical 50 years earlier. The adoption ceremony at Aberdeen Proving Ground included Viktor Lazarevich as guest of honor, representing tank crews whose survival had proven the battlefield effectiveness of the innovations that had been conducted outside military approval. Army officials acknowledged that Casimir's unauthorized modifications had demonstrated the superiority of individual expertise over bureaucratic procedures, while noting that modern procurement systems included provisions for rapid evaluation of innovative proposals. The recognition came too late for Casimir to enjoy personally, yet it validated his conviction that technical excellence should override procedural compliance when human lives depended on superior performance. His work had required decades to receive official acknowledgement, yet the mathematical precision of his metallurgical theories and the statistical evidence of battlefield success had eventually overcome institutional resistance to unauthorized innovation. The steel processing techniques he had developed in secret during World War II became standard practice for military and civilian applications, while his case study continued to influence discussions about the balance between individual initiative and organizational authority. His legacy represented successful demonstration that innovative thinking could achieve superior results when institutional procedures failed to address urgent operational requirements, providing inspiration for future researchers who might face similar conflicts between personal conviction and official policy. Would you have broken military regulations to implement superior technology that could save American lives? Or would you have obeyed procedural requirements despite knowing that better solutions existed? Comment below and share this story so others remember how one man's willingness to challenge authority transformed laboratory theories into battlefield reality that saved hundreds of tank crews during World War II. The mathematical impossibility of Victor's survival had been achieved through metallurgical innovation that existed outside official recognition. Yet the human relationships that resulted from Casimir's unauthorized work provided validation that transcended statistical analysis or technical achievement. His story demonstrates that individual conscience and technical expertise can combine to achieve results that serve broader humanitarian purposes, even when such actions require violation of institutional authority and personal risk for uncertain recognition.